a very unprecedented situation. We've let the debt completely run away from us, and we have to keep the ship running, so to speak, but it's sinking at the same time under the weight of all this debt that we've brought onto ourselves. Really, every time they print money, every time the government borrows, that money goes somewhere. And I don't think that these companies are necessarily becoming more valuable. And we see a lot of concentration when you look at the stock market. Yes, it's at all-time highs, but like 7 companies are carrying that, right? When you print more money, when you add units to the supply, when you increase M2, those units are going somewhere and they're chasing assets. And so I think this is just another bubble. And Mark did say that, like, at this point, we've kicked it from, companies in the dot-com bubble to the housing market. And now we've kicked it all the way up to the sovereign level. And where do you go from there, right? We know that they're probably not going to choose austerity. They're going to choose to print and devalue the currency. And that's why I think it's so imperative for us to teach people about Bitcoin, because when it comes to hard assets, I don't think that there's any that have better properties than Bitcoin, but also that is more accessible than Bitcoin, truly, to everybody. It's not possible for someone to just go online and purchase a small fraction of a beachfront property in Miami. In stocks, it's like, how do you figure out where to go? And plus, a lot of the stocks underperform Bitcoin. So it's like Bitcoin is truly like the best asset that I think people can start to dollar cost average into.
You can't beat them, then you pop them. You can't man them, then you mop them. You can't stand them, then you drop them. You pop them, cause we pop them like overred and vodka. C3, okay, a millionaire. I'm a young
This episode of the
millionaire.
Bitcoin Economy is brought to you in part by Ledden.
Need cash but don't want to sell your Bitcoin? Ledden is the global leader in Bitcoin-backed loans, issuing over 9 billion loans since 2018. And they were the first to offer proof of reserves.
With Ledden, you get custody loans, no credit checks, no monthly payments, and more. Visit ledn.io for more information.
Welcome back to the Bitcoin Economy. Today we have Natalie Brunell, host of Coin Stories and author of Bitcoin is for Everyone. Natalie, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
Of course.
So Natalie, we were just talking. I'm from Minnesota. You're from Chicago originally, but actually originally you were born in Poland. And then I was just researching you and saw when you were 5 years old, you learned English by watching the news, and come full circle now. You're now on the news and kind of the leader in the space for the Bitcoin economy, right? Your new book, The Bitcoin is for Everyone, was it a lot of that inspired kind of from your upbringing? I'd love to hear kind of what inspired you to ultimately write your book.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely share a little bit of my backstory in the book, and that's right. I was born in Poland. My parents grew up under communism. So I grew up with their stories of just how difficult it was to imagine life that was full of, opportunity and economic hope, the way that the American dream, offers us. And so that's why they really wanted to flee to a country that represented freedom. And it was a fascinating experience watching them, because they came here, and just as they were able to finally achieve the American dream and purchase their first house, get a mortgage, the housing bubble blew up. And so that made me feel like, wait a second, there's something wrong with this system, because my parents just played by all the rules. And the bankers just got bailed out, but 10 million American families, including mine, lost our homes. And so a seed was planted. But until I learned about Bitcoin, I really did not understand how the financial system worked. I didn't understand inflation. I just thought, like so many people, that, hey, prices go up. There's nothing we can do about it. Things were cheaper when our, grandparents were growing up than today. And it was Bitcoin that helped me connect so many dots. And I learned it through all these amazing books and podcasts and the great voices we have in the space. And so I think there was part of me when I was reading the books that wished that I could combine all of the books into one to give to my friends. I wish that I could just hand them a very gentle orange pill that has a little bit of everything. It has the monetary history. It talks about human rights and the global impact. It tells you how to actually buy and store Bitcoin and what problem it fixes in the financial system. And so that's what I tried to do. It's a book that really is about empowerment. And I want people to feel like they're not too late and they can understand it. They can learn. And I'm really excited to finally share it, because it's been a years-long process in the making.
Yeah, I think you recently interviewed Alden, and she has an amazing book with Broken Money. I think very fundamental. But it's hard to get the average person to read that in the US if they don't believe they have money problems, if they've never had stress going to the bank, never had trouble getting a mortgage. With your book, is your focus and like how do you really like get down to getting people to care when they have only first world problems but no second or third world problems?
Well, I mean, you make a great point, right? Because I mean, Lynn has probably the most thorough explanation of the history of money as a technology. And yet there are so many people who are just not paying attention to this topic, right? Every voice matters. And any type of little gentle orange pill that you can provide, I think makes a difference. And so I just hope to be one of many of these great voices, great books out there that someone picks up and is maybe like a really easy introduction, a really easy entry point for them to start thinking differently about Bitcoin. Maybe they've dismissed it because they've heard some of the FUD that's out there in my previous industry, in the news, in the mainstream news. Maybe they think they're too late because it's over 6 figures. I just want to prove to people that the time is right now. I mean, the best day to buy Bitcoin was yesterday. The second best day is today. And I just want people to start to pay attention because we know that things are changing and we feel it all around us. That's something that I kind of acknowledge at the very beginning of the book. I kind of say to the reader, you know, let's get on the same page. We all know that there is a problem. We sense that something is wrong, but we don't really know the cause. And I think a lot of people have divided themselves into political teams recently, and they blame things on politics. But I kind of make the case in the book to look deeper than that, to look beyond just the two teams that are out there. What is our financial system built on? How is money issued? And like, why should we care about the fact that someone can just print it out of thin air when we have to work so hard for every dollar that we have? So those kinds of questions I think are universal and they're very welcoming and bring people in. It's a very neutral book. It doesn't take a political stance in any direction. So, you know, we're going to do our best because we've got a long way to go. We've made a lot of progress with Bitcoin, orange pilling people, but we still have many millions to go.
So I went back to the Wayback Machine, and I think this is your first tweet back in 2017. So correct me if I'm wrong here, but Bitcoin dropped, right? And that was kind of that first come up. And then around this time, Bitcoin started to drop very rapidly. Fast forward now.
Bitcoin tweet?
I think so. I used Grok and I went back and I said, what was her first Bitcoin tweet?
That is so funny.
But what's even funnier, right, is you have one like. Today, you could say, I'm going to have a sandwich for lunch and get, 100,000 likes, right? So 2 questions. One, how have Bitcoin changed? Obviously, I think a lot of people are aware of with the ETFs and treasury companies. But over the past 2 years, your personal story, how do you think it's evolved, I'd say, over the past 2 years? And since this tweet, how have you personally evolved kind of as this influencer or educator in the space?
Gosh, it's so funny to see that because my journey did start around 2016, 2017. I bought Bitcoin when it was around $3,000 to $4,000. And of course, I was like so many of the people that I meet today, so skeptical. I thought I could lose all my money. Oh my God, it's digital. They can definitely make more. It's going to be hacked. So I fell into all of those myths. And I remember trying to pitch a story because I was a news reporter. That's my background. And I actually was given the green light to do a story about Bitcoin ATMs in 2017. So if you Google, like, I think you can actually Google like Natalie Sacramento Bitcoin ATMs. There is a story out there that I did, but it was so hard for me to cover Bitcoin. I really had to go outside of my journalism career in my free time and just start really devouring everything I could by myself. And so I went on this like self-education journey that I think so many of your audience have probably been on as well. I just wanted to read everything I could about it. I was so curious because you hear from these prominent voices and at the time there were fewer than even today. But they were saying that this is transformative. This is the future of money. We're all going to be on the Bitcoin standard today. And so any logical person would say, whoa, I mean, this is a little too good to be true. What are they talking about? And I had to really humble myself and peel back the layers and really start to understand economics and our financial system and how banks work. And that was just a fascinating journey. So over the last few years, I just feel like I've been on the most incredible learning journey. way, way more valuable than anything I took away from college and my earlier education. I just feel called to share this message because if I can learn it, anyone can learn it. I didn't have a finance background. I didn't have an engineering background. I was not a computer programmer. So it did take me time. It was one of the most challenging things to learn, but so rewarding and so meaningful because Bitcoin does intersect with literally like every subject in some way. And it makes you think about your life differently. It makes you think about your money differently. It makes you think about the future in a much more hopeful way. And so, yeah, I've been on an incredible journey. I'm a very different person. It's like pre-Bitcoin, post-Bitcoin. And I wouldn't change it for anything except I just wish that I learned about Bitcoin sooner.
We all do, of course.
Yeah.
But it's good for everyone to, recognize people find Bitcoin when it's right for them or when it's meant for them. As I think Michael Saylor has a quote for. So one question we have for you is you've interviewed Michael Saylor several times throughout the years, and his story has certainly evolved. And someone had mentioned around he has a knack for explaining Bitcoin and explaining a lot of the, corporate engineering or corporate finance engineering around MicroStrategy or strategy differently every time, and it almost seems like he's working and studying at it just so that he can like use a different analogy in every interview to try to get other people to understand it in a new way. What's been your experience going through these different interviews and how have you seen him evolve?
What's up, everyone? Want to pause the podcast for 2 seconds to introduce 21rates.com. The Bitcoin economy is growing. However, it is very complex. And so, Jody, introduce what 21rates.com is.
Yeah. After seeing our friends lose a bunch of money in BlockFi, Celsius, and other bankruptcies, there needs to be more transparency in the space. We want to build a Bitcoin personal finance website that breaks down lenders, courts, custodians, exchanges, the best places to buy Bitcoin, or even the ETFs for those new to the industry. Go to 21rates.com. You can check out the Bitcoin company directory, 170 plus companies. It's free. The content's there. We want to educate everyone, and we're building in public. So please bring your feedback.
I believe that Michael Saylor is one of the most brilliant people on this planet. I really do. He takes the time to really study everything carefully. I think he just cares so much, and it's so evident. And he put his conviction where his mouth is, right? I mean, he has placed his entire company's balance sheet. He buys as often as anyone possibly could. And it's so amazing to see how generous he is with his time because someone like Michael Saylor doesn't have to be attending all of these conferences and giving these long keynotes and making the time for everyone, no matter who they are. My show was tiny when he did the podcast, but he's so willing to give of himself because he believes that Bitcoin is the most transformative technology and something that empowers everyone from the folks like him in boardrooms and in executive suites all the way down to the people that are the poorest and who really need a lifeline and to be able to save and who are in maybe countries where they are completely oppressed and have no freedom. He cares. He really cares, and it's inspiring. And so every time I speak with him, I learn something new. It's always fun too, because you don't even have to come up with that many questions because he will go for 20 minutes on one question and give you a lesson that you didn't even know you needed. And he is the ultimate teacher. I've learned so much, and there's so much more to learn because every time he goes on stage, to your points, like he manages to find a new way to articulate the value proposition of Bitcoin, or he comes up with some new innovative product. He's really incredible. Like I've always been fascinated with people of that level of intelligence. And I just think that you should be around them because by osmosis, maybe you'll pick some of it up. And we're so lucky. We're so lucky to have him in Bitcoin.
Yeah. I think the game-changing moment for me and Jody was actually going to Strategy World down in Orlando. And I think you were hosting that, or maybe you were at least on stage several times, right? And what was fascinating was, to your point, he brought up like Semler Scientific. He brought up all these other treasury companies at his own conference. So in teaching, and you talk to any of these guys and they say like, yes, we'll talk with Michael and he'll like explain how he's building out some of this. Now that you're associated with Semler, and now congratulations on the acquisition and merger with Strive Asset Management, what does that feel like kind of on the other side of things where you're now in that driver's seat of being a board member there?
Yeah, I mean, it's been an incredible experience. I can't say the word learning enough. I guess it's just everything is such a fascinating learning experience. This is the first board of a public company that I had the honor of joining. Eric Semler, it was first a legendary investor, and then he pivoted, and this company was like a legacy for his family. His father built it. It was actually the best performing stock from about 2016 to 2020 or so. I mean, like explosive growth. And he wanted to blend the two missions of medical freedom and really helping address the chronic disease issue that we have in this country, the chronic health epidemic, make America healthy again, with his passion for Bitcoin. And so he was the second chairman of a public company after Michael Saylor to adopt this strategy. And so it's been really just incredible to be on the team. And the merger is such exciting news as well. And I think we're going to see more mergers and acquisitions probably throughout the space, because it's going to be kind of a race, like which one can accumulate the most Bitcoin. And there's one that's very far ahead of all of the companies. And now there's these fascinating strategies like Strategy is deploying, which is entering the preferred market, issuing these different securities. And I think that there will be more that we will see from a lot of different companies. It's also really interesting to see the ones popping up globally that are taking advantage of things like, different tax structures, like in Japan and Brazil. So I think it's just the beginning. And I know that there's volatility in the market, but I just urge people always to zoom out, because we are so early in the stages of corporate Bitcoin adoption. And so obviously when there's volatility, Bitcoin is a very liquid market that can move very dramatically. But over the long run, there's no asset that I think a company should have more than Bitcoin. So yeah, it's been exciting.
Yeah, on the topic of volatility, obviously have to address it. There was a big, volatility spike on Friday, and a lot of leverage trading wiped out. This week has been painful for Bitcoin, specifically with it hitting, I think, 104 this morning, which, to say that, is saying something, right? It's triple digits, or, it's over 100,000. It's exciting to see, Bitcoin at that level, and us panicking that it's going from 125 or 126 down to 104. But watching your recent interview with Mark Moss, he talks about a reverse crash. And in that, he's explaining it's going to look a little bit differently. Runaway inflation and rising asset prices, instead of the typical, crash of like all the prices like collapsing and the housing market collapsing.
Yeah.
What was your takeaway from that? Do you believe that? Is that something where you think that is what we're going to see in the next couple months to, year?
I mean, I think that a big print is coming, right? To borrow from Larry Lepard. I just think that we are in a very unprecedented situation. We've let the debt completely run away from us, and we have to keep the ship running, so to speak, but it's sinking at the same time under the weight of all this debt that we've brought onto ourselves. Really, every time they print money, every time the government borrows, that money goes somewhere. And I don't think that these companies are necessarily becoming more valuable. And we see a lot of concentration when you look at the stock market. Yes, it's at all-time highs, but like 7 companies are carrying that, right? When you print more money, when you add units to the supply, when you increase M2, those units are going somewhere, and they're chasing assets. And so I think this is just another bubble. And Mark did say that, like, at this point, we've kicked it from, companies in the .com bubble to the housing market. And now we've kicked it all the way up to the sovereign level. And where do you go from there? Right. We know that they're probably not going to choose austerity. They're going to choose to print and devalue the currency. And that's why I think it's so imperative for us to teach people about Bitcoin, because when it comes to hard assets, I don't think that there's any that have better properties than Bitcoin, but also that is more accessible than Bitcoin, truly, to everybody. It's not possible for someone to just go online and purchase a small fraction of a beachfront property in Miami. In stocks, it's like, how do you figure out where to go? And plus, a lot of the stocks underperform Bitcoin. So it's like Bitcoin is truly like the best asset that I think people can start to dollar cost average into. And we're in a time where things are changing. People are losing faith in the dollar as a global reserve asset. I think more countries are pivoting back to gold. And we've seen just like recently a reversal, right? US Treasuries were the dominant reserve asset, and now we've gone back to gold. We've almost gone back in time. I think in the future, Bitcoin will be part of that asset kind of makeup of central bank reserves. And I think that people just really, they need to take this seriously, because they're only going to see prices increase at the grocery store, at the gas tank, college tuition, and they need to protect themselves. And so, where do you go when you've gone this far into debt? You just keep printing. And we're not the first nation to do this. Many have done it in the past, and we know what happens when a nation just lives by the money printer. So I can understand why he calls it a reverse crash, because the numbers keep going up, but your standard of living is kind of deteriorating unless you are in hard assets like Bitcoin.
Yeah. No, I think it's fascinating. And we're seeing this kind of financialization of Bitcoin. And, the name of our podcast is the Bitcoin economy. And so we saw that you just interviewed the co-founder of Ledden. I got to give them a shout out there. They are the sponsor of our show as well. But Mauricio, awesome guy. What are you seeing in terms of like the personal finance, or what would your best personal finance tip be when it does come to Bitcoin, as Bitcoin becomes more ubiquitous?
I mean, I just like to keep it simple. Learn about Bitcoin, start dollar cost averaging, make sure that you're buying from an exchange that is focused on Bitcoin, compliant, regulated, and then take self-custody. Don't think that it's not for you or it's too intimidating or too technical. There are plenty of ways to learn how to do it very simply. I love the guys at the Bitcoin Way who will teach you how to do it. The self-custody wallets, there are so many that are so simple. I just recently had a whole tutorial for me about BitKey, which was so fascinating how simple BitKey is to use. And then if you graduate to that level of, you've got some Bitcoin and now you want to have a little bit more liquidity, you don't want to sell your Bitcoin, a company like Ledden comes in, you can borrow against your Bitcoin. Obviously never take on too much leverage. I'm really against the idea of people trading, taking on leverage, doing these sort of like margin bets. I just think that's a little risky because things are volatile, not just because Bitcoin is volatile, but like the market around it right now, things are really, really volatile. And I think that you just have to be really careful what you're doing with your savings. But yeah, it's just so cool that there are so many more options. Like there are options upon options that are releasing, and I think it's great. And I think that there will only be more, and competition is good. And I think that the exciting thing about Bitcoin is there's more of a free market within Bitcoin. Like in the legacy world, it's all the too big to fail banks, right? And you don't have that many options really. And if something does go wrong, we know that Mama Bear, Papa Bear over at the Federal Reserve will just bail you out. But in Bitcoin, it's like value accumulates to where it really belongs. It's where it's really offered. And so I think it's exciting to see the companies that have been built in the space, and we'll see more in the future.
Yeah, we've seen a ton of, in our research for 21 Race, seen a ton of like these durable Bitcoin only companies that have great long-term vision. In the more short and medium term, as you're doing research for your book, what do you see as the future or, biggest need for Bitcoin education? Where are the gaps, and like, how do we get more like women involved in the space?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just trying to reach where the eyeballs and ears are. I think it's different depending on the demographic. Like, for example, my peer group, the women that I'm close with, they're all on Instagram, which is one of the reasons I've kind of prioritized Instagram videos more and trying to get out in front of them, hoping the algorithm will sort of pick it up. But I also understand, because I'm on Instagram, but I look at videos of like cooking or dachshund dogs or something. And I just want to push out some very approachable financial content, because it does matter and they need to pay attention. And these are demographics that are younger, that some of them have started to achieve, great success in their careers, and they don't know what to do with their money, or they're just like trusting their kind of 401ks to manage that, or to go into a passive index fund. And like, you can make active choices, and you can start dollar cost averaging into an asset that outperforms all of that, but you need to get people's attention. And so I think meeting them where they are and helping them understand that, you recognize the problem that they may have, which is that everything around us is getting more expensive. Let's maybe dig into why and not just assume that's the way things have to be. And then teaching them kind of in a very gentle way about Bitcoin and what it offers, and dispelling some of the myths, because there are still so many misunderstandings about Bitcoin. But it's just, it's different depending on the group. We do need more work. I'm certainly going to be focused on that in the next year with my book coming out, really trying to reach the newcomer, the people who are maybe on the sidelines and not feeling as confident about how they look at Bitcoin. So we're going to try, but always looking for ideas too on how to reach the most people.
Yeah. Last question, I guess, just to bring it back to your book, of course. What was like the most exciting chapter to write? Was there any like moments of the book and like was there news? I've never written a book, and I'm always curious, like, hey, if something happens midway through the book, does that like change the trajectory of the book? Was there anything in kind of real time as you were writing it that added a chapter or the most fun chapter to write?
Oh gosh, that's tough. That's a tough one. I would say one of the chapters that I really love is the human rights chapter. And I have to give kudos to Alex Gladstein. I would call that kind of like my check your financial privilege inspired chapter, because there's such a global impact. And, when we zoom out, like I talk about a lot of the problems, especially if you're in the US, some the problems that you'll recognize with our current system and our banks. But then when you zoom out, you realize truly how privileged we are, because so many people don't have access to any sort of currency that can allow them to save until Bitcoin. So I think that was a really fun chapter. And I incorporate some stories globally of people fighting for Bitcoin and what they've experienced. But the beginning of the book was, I think, the most challenging and rewarding, because I really had to sit down and take all the knowledge that I have taken in about the financial history and how our system works and break it down as simply as possible. And so I went back and forth. It's like, what do you include? What do you not include? Because I don't want anyone to pick up the book and feel like, oh, this is already going over my head and there's too many charts and I have no idea what she's talking about. I wanted to take subjects and topics and vocabulary that once felt foreign to me and allow people to feel like, oh, I can understand this. For example, like M2. Before Bitcoin, I never even thought about, I never knew what M2 was, but I certainly didn't think about it, right? If someone were to give me a chart, I would be like, okay, our money supply is going up. But like, I try to explain how that matters. Like that's something that we talk about in the space. It matters. What happened in 1971, right? It's just very approachable ways to kind of communicate the lessons of Bitcoin. So it was just the best. It was such a great journey writing it. And I loved every step of the way.
Yeah. The human rights piece that you started with, I think, is super interesting. And that's something I wouldn't have thought of, because most people think of Bitcoin as an investment, as money, but it's part of like your brokerage account, and hopefully number goes up and you're richer. But I think in Lynn's book, listening to it, and she's talking about, hey, like, because you can increase the money supply, and because the British government did it to finance World War I, that later basically opened the kimono for any government to go in and start printing money to fund these wars, which they probably shouldn't be in, and the public wouldn't vote for if they understood the price tag of it. And he talks about even the U.S. with the war on Iraq and the war against terror. Like, a lot of that probably wouldn't have taken place. The American public would look very differently if we weren't able to inflate our own economy and print dollars. And how many lives could be saved? And I think more people, through your book and through Lynn's book, if you can understand that makes a better human rights, bigger picture case for why Bitcoin versus just thinking of it as a speculative investment.
For sure. I absolutely agree with everything you said. I also touch on our status as global reserve currency, right? And the fact that has been a double-edged sword, because a lot of people are very, rah, we do not want to lose that. And I'm not saying we will, but I'm just kind of encouraging people to start to think about like what that actually means and why we have financialized the entire economy, why that has helped to hollow out the middle class and our industrial base, what that translates to, when it comes to people's real lives. And it's just all the things that I've learned, but just broken down in the most simple way possible with approachable images.
Speaking of which, I just pulled this up. I thought it'd be a good way to end, is fix the money, fix the world. A very famous picture and message as well. So thanks so much for coming on, Natalie. Always a pleasure, and hope to have you back. And congrats. Everyone go buy her book.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
And the almighty power of Allah. Yeah. Sister, brother, son, daughter, father, mother, loving coppers. Got the Maserati dancing on the bridge, trunk popping till the coppers, ha, 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 ha. You can't catch them, you can't stop them. I go by them goon rules. If you can't beat them, then you pop them. You can't man them, then you mop them. You can't stand them, then you drop them. You pop them, cause we pop them like over red and vodka.